Hi everyone, I'm back and this is just a very short demo on how I paint various trees. So here we go. I get asked all the time about my trees, and I start, like anything else, with my lightest colour first, and I manipulate the brush so that I use the point of it and the side of the brush. This is my little round brush that I'm using now, and I use the side of the brush to get a nice broad wash, and I use the tip of the brush to get more pointed and detailed marks. I'm using quite a bit of colour here as well. I'm gone now to a little rigger to just get the finer branches in. I think what's important to know is that we need to understand the shape of the tree that we're painting. And although these trees are made up, you've seen trees like these before, I'm sure, where they've got almost an ice cream shape to them. And when the paint has lost the sheen on the paper, I now use a palette knife to scrape back into the wet paint. Now, this tree I'm doing now is more of an oak tree, where the branches come fairly low to the ground, and I did the trunk first and then just put in a little bit of foliage afterwards. I'm tapping the end of my little brush to get a splatter going as well. And then the finer details with little branches and the darks just added as the tree develops. This one I'm using my dagger brush, and it also gets rolled on the side of the brush as well as the tip. But I can get some wonderful crazy marks with a dagger brush, so it's a lot of the time more out of control than what a round brush would be. But I like that because I like to get that random mark. So you can keep adding and subtracting by rolling a damp brush into some of the paint and taking some of it out. But just using the tip and putting a little bit of detail in, and now I'm rolling my damp number 8 round brush to take out some of the marks. Now this one is just going to be a low group of shrubs. So I put down the yellow first, and then I'm adding my greens and my darker greens behind it. And at the bottom of as the foliage develops, I get a little bit of dark going, and it's using my dagger brush as well, and get a little bit of line in there. And now just using a damp brush to roll and take out some of the pigment, and then scraping with my palette knife. And look at the way I hold my palette knife too. It's very important. Don't use a really pointy palette knife. This one is a palm tree. So I'm doing the fronds first, starting with a light colour first, and I'm just kind of developing where I think the fronds would be. And then I'm adding a little bit of a slightly deeper yellow, a khaki kind of green yellow, and now I'm adding a little bit of darker green colours. I'm using the dagger brush for this, and now the trunk with this one, I'm leaving quite a bit of white in amongst the trunk. Kind of a hit and miss trunk, because palm trees usually have little pieces sticking out from them. So I just keep adding with my darks, using the point of my dagger brush, and just look at the shape. All the trees have their own personality. I add a little bit of dark within the trunk, and just put a little bit of ground at the bottom of the trunk so it's not floating around. These are merely exercises to play with. With my little rigger brush, I'm just adding a little bit more detail, and especially a little cluster underneath where the foliage starts from the trunk. There's usually some dry pieces just hanging down, so that's why I'm putting them in with my little rigger brush. And this one is going to be a group of palm trees, and I'm starting with the trunk first. And you get so many different palm trees. Some of them the trunks are very willowy and thin and narrow and almost windswept, so that they bend and have some very ambiguous sort of shapes. So adding the fronds after the trunk goes in, and I might even develop even more trunks after this, I don't know. Just gradually start with your yellow or a light colour first, and then mix in your secondary and tertiary greens. And just keep building up until you feel that the tree has got a nice shape to it. And see what happens. And for this one, I'm using my little rigger brush for the whole thing, just getting some very fine lines. I mean, your brushes are your tools, so all of the brushes make a different mark for you, and you should play with that. I would suggest you do these as exercises yourself. Just play with your own little groups of trees and keep them as reference in a file so that you can take them out occasionally and have a look at how you did them. I think it's rather good practice for you. And try using the different brushes for different marks. So building up this tree and getting more of the fronds going. Here's another trunk coming into it. I've used a little bit of a warmer colour. I think that's like a burnt sienna coming into it. Little dab occasionally on the edge. I like to make the edges of the trunks a little irregular too in places. A lot of the time I'll put little pieces coming out from the trunks. Okay, here we go again. Now this is with my little round brush. It's a number 8 silver black velvet brush, and I'm playing with the complementary colours of an orange red and then a green. And obviously a lot of people would say, oh, that's going to make mud, but I think you can see it doesn't if you're strategic and careful the way you place your colours. It's a nice interplay of colours when you see those colours together. I'm using a thirsty brush now just to roll into this, take out some of the paint. But you notice all the little marks that are made here, it's almost spotty, and that's called stippling. The technique of that is to stipple the paint on with just the point of your brush. Here we go now with like a poplar type tree or a cypress tree that you might see in Europe. You'll see lots of these sort of trees, and the branches do reach upwards, but there are other trees of this shape where the branches reach down. So you have to kind of study the trees before you paint them if you're out plein air painting. And I'm using my palette knife just to scrape back in occasionally. You notice I'm swiping and then I wipe on a paper towel because I don't want to transfer dirty paint from one area to another. It's just to get the trunk organised. Now I'm adding a little bit of dark here and there just to reinforce where I think the trunk would be, and I make it a little bit more stable by putting some ground on the bottom of it. And here we go with my dagger brush again, and I'm making just a very random scrubby sort of tree with lots of wayward limbs and marks coming out from it. Start with a light colour first and then introduce the greeny colours. But I'm using the point of the dagger brush a lot with this. Getting a little darker every now and then just so that it gives some sort of substance to the centre of the tree. Using my palette knife to scrape back in, and this way I can now make branches in all different directions. So on to the next one. Okay, I've got my dagger brush in my hand and I put a little bit of paint down, and now I'm just going to blow it with my drinking straw. And remember, a short blow like that gives you nice short marks, but if you do a long blow it can get out of control. Once again using complementary colours. So the grass or the random marks the straw made become my trees. This is good for grasses too. I like doing my grasses like this. So I'm just going to augment some of these marks to make them look a little bit more tree-like and add a little bit of foliage on them occasionally. You can really make quite a forest scene out of something like this. I hope this is getting your imagination going, watching how these are done. Thirsty brush, just take out a bit of paint before you do any scraping with the palette knife. And now look what's happening. I'm doing a little bit of rock formations here and there, which I can augment later on, come in behind the shapes and create some sort of little rocks, little marks that indicate some sort of escarpment or something. Good for playing around, just doing, if you've got nothing to do, just play with something, a little scene like this where you can just make things up and explore the possibilities. It's fun. And one short blow with the straw just to get a finish to that. I might come back to it later, but now I'm going to do a little group of trees, and on my walk this morning I noticed fall colours, the lovely orange and gold colours, so I'm kind of influenced by that. Doing a little stipple going on here, leaving lots of white within the mass. And I start with a light colour first, and now I'm adding the more of the magenta and burnt sienna colours over the top of that. This is going to be a mass of trees coming together, and I'm not sure what sort of trees they are, and I'm influenced, I guess, by the light, almost white trunks, and you have those little flecks of dark bark on them. So I'm going to try and do my own version of that. So just dabbing it with a paper towel after I put the colour on, it's just enough to keep a little indication of the outside edge, and then I add a little bit more of the bark touches. So just imagining thin and thick trunks, and my mixtures have got a little bit of blue in them, as I think it's cobalt blue with burnt sienna. Taking a little bit of that paint out with the paper towel helps, because it's just a very light indication of the trunk rather than having it too solid, almost a transparent trunk. So this is what I would call my copse of trees, just a group of trees together, all of the same type of tree. And the branches for these come out and usually bend down, so especially at the bottom part of the trunks. I guess it's sort of like an aspen tree, but I'm an Australian, so I'm not that used to seeing aspen trees. But this is a Ray Andrews copse of trees, okay? And then I'll go in and just augment the foliage a little bit. And obviously there was a lot more foliage than this, but I don't want to run into my palm tree above. So give yourself a bit of room when you do this little exercise. I ran out of room. But leaving a nice demarcation between the light colour you started with and the secondary colour, and then go into your tertiary colours. All in the same family though, they're all warm colours. Using my palette knife to scrape back in, and occasionally giving a dark branch, a positive branch in amongst all of that. And this was using my silver black velvet number 8 round brush. A little bit darker in the foliage on the underside of the foliage, and just little touches to make the trees look a little, the trunks of them look a little bit more realistic. Fun though, huh? I hope you're enjoying this. I enjoyed it. I thought it was great fun. And for the last of this whole exercise, I just go back in and augment where I think maybe things have faded a little bit. But that's all for my little tree exercises. I hope you'll feel inspired enough to try them on your own. And please come back and visit me again. In the meantime, thanks for watching.